The night my husband slammed me into the kitchen counter, the only sound I heard afterward was the rain hitting the skylight above us. Steady, indifferent, like it had seen worse. I hadn't even done anything wrong. I'd asked him where he'd been. That was it. 3 words. He'd been coming home late for 4 months by then. Sometimes past midnight, smelling like a restaurant I'd never been taken to. I told myself it was the new project. The Edmonton contract. The pressure at work. I told myself a lot of things that winter. I'd gotten good at it. My name is Claire, and I was 31 years old when my marriage fell apart. Not slowly, the way people sometimes describe it. Like a sweater unraveling thread by thread, mine fell apart all at once, on a Tuesday night in February, in the kitchen of the house we'd bought together 3 years earlier in a suburb just outside of Calgary. We'd met when I was 24. He was funny in the way that makes you trust someone too fast. Quick with a joke, quick to make you feel like the only person in the room. His name was Daniel. I called him Dan. He called me Babe. Even in front of his parents, which I used to think was sweet. I know better now. We got married after 2 years. Small ceremony, backyard of my aunt's place in Airdrie, September, the leaves just starting to turn. My daughter, our daughter, was born 14 months later. We named her Rosie. Well, I named her Rosie. Dan said it sounded like a grandmother's name and suggested Alexa. I said no, and for once he let me have something without an argument. Rosie was 5 years old the night everything broke open. She'd been in bed for an hour already when Dan came home. I heard his keys before I heard the door. A particular sound I'd learned to brace for. The way you brace for weather. If the keys jangled loose and easy, he was in a fine mood. If they hit the bowl hard and deliberate, I had maybe 40 seconds to find something to look busy with. That night they hit the bowl hard. I was standing at the sink rinsing the last of the dinner dishes. I didn't turn around. I kept my hands in the water even though I'd already finished. I heard him open the fridge, heard the seal pull and click shut, heard him move into the kitchen behind me. "Where were you?" I asked. I still don't know why I said it. Maybe because I'd been not saying it for 4 months and I was just tired. Maybe because some part of me had decided, somewhere in the back of my mind, that it was time. That whatever was coming was going to come eventually, so it might as well come now. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I'm asking." The counter came up fast. I didn't see it. I felt it. My hip catching the edge when he grabbed my arm and spun me. The back of my head hit the cabinet above. Not hard enough to knock me out. Hard enough that for a second I thought I was going to be sick. I slid down to the floor and sat there with my hands flat on the tile and my ears ringing. He stood over me. He said something. I couldn't hear it clearly. Everything had gone strange and muffled. And then he walked away. I heard the television go on in the living room. The hockey game. The normal, ordinary sound of the hockey game. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time. The next morning I told myself I'd slipped. I didn't believe it. But I told myself anyway, which I think is its own kind of proof of how far gone I already was. I made Dan's coffee. I got Rosie dressed for kindergarten. I drove her to school and waved to her teacher the way I always did. On the way home, I sat in the parking lot of a Shoppers Drug Mart for 20 minutes, just breathing. The bruise on my hip turned purple by Thursday. I wore leggings until it faded. What I didn't know then, what I'd find out later, from a woman named Gloria who worked at the Victim Services office in the city, was that the incident that feels like a one-time thing almost never is. That the first time a man puts his hands on you that way, he has already been building toward it for much longer than you realized. It didn't come from nowhere. Nothing does. I'd seen the signs. I just hadn't let myself read them. The first time he'd raised his voice at me badly was 2 years into the marriage. We'd been arguing about money. We'd overextended ourselves on the house, and I'd suggested I go back to work full-time now that Rosie was past the infant stage. He'd said that if I went back to work, it meant I thought his income wasn't good enough, and somehow a practical conversation turned into 45 minutes of him telling me I never appreciated anything he did. I apologized. I don't remember what for. After that, it happened in small ways, regularly. A dish moved to the wrong shelf, commented on with a particular edge. A question answered with a look that said I was stupid for asking. Doors closed a little too firmly. The escalation was so gradual that each individual moment seemed too small to name, and there's something about naming it that feels enormous. Like once you say the word out loud, you can't put it back. So I didn't say it. Then February came, and the kitchen floor and the purple bruise and the hockey game playing like nothing had happened. And then I found the messages. It was an accident. His phone was charging on the nightstand and mine had died, and I picked his up to set an alarm for the morning without thinking. It unlocked with his face. He'd fallen asleep. The most recent notification was from a name I didn't recognize, a woman's name, and the preview text read, "Tonight was everything." I've never felt like this before. I stood in the dark bedroom holding his phone and reading. I'm not proud of the way I felt. I'm not going to pretend I was calm or dignified. My hands shook so badly that at one point I nearly dropped it. 4 months. The messages went back 4 months exactly, which lined up so precisely with when the late nights had started that I almost left. I put the phone back on the nightstand. I went to the guest bathroom. I sat on the edge of the tub, and I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. The feeling was too big for crying. I just sat there until my breathing slowed down. Then I started to think. I want to be clear about something. The woman I was before that night would have confronted him immediately. She would have gone back into that bedroom, thrown on the lights, and let all of it out at once. The messages, the bruise, the months of silence. All of it. She would have trusted that being honest and direct would lead somewhere productive. But I'd learned something from the kitchen floor. I'd learned what happened when I surprised him with a question he didn't want to answer. So I waited. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. I smiled at breakfast. I packed his lunch. I drove Rosie to school, and I had my coffee, and I chatted with the neighbor about whether the city would fix the pothole on our street before spring. And the entire time, I was quietly building a case. I started taking pictures of my bruises. I had a faint one still on my upper arm from when he'd grabbed me. I photographed it against a white wall with a timestamp. I wrote down dates and details in the Notes app I hid inside a folder on my phone marked recipes. I contacted a lawyer through a referral from my cousin who lives in Vancouver. She'd gone through her own divorce 3 years earlier, and she gave me a name without asking too many questions. The lawyer's name was Helen. She was 50-something, small, and she had a way of listening that made you feel like every word you said was being filed somewhere useful. She told me that what Dan had done constituted domestic violence under the law and that it would be relevant to both my personal safety and to any custody arrangement. That word, custody, is the one that made it all real. Rosie. I hadn't let myself think fully about Rosie yet, not about what it would mean, not about how you tell a 5-year-old that her family is going to look different from now on. When I let myself go there, in the lawyer's office, I started crying and couldn't stop for a while. Helen passed me a box of tissues and didn't say anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. I had to figure out where to go. We had the house, but the house was under both our names, and I couldn't exactly kick Dan out, not without a court order, which took time. My parents were in Kelowna. My mom had health issues, and I didn't want to put the weight of it on her. My best friend, her name is Jody. We've known each other since we were 12. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment downtown, and she had a cat. Rosie was allergic to. In the end, I went to my aunt's place, the same aunt who'd lent us her backyard for the wedding. Her name is Kathleen. She's my mom's older sister, and she's the kind of woman who never says I told you so, even when she absolutely could. She'd met Dan twice before we got married, and she'd hugged me tight at the wedding and whispered that she hoped he was as good as he seemed. I think that whisper was a question she was too kind to ask directly. When I called her, I was parked outside the Shoppers again. Different Tuesday, same parking lot. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Auntie Kathleen, I need help." And I heard her take a breath, and she said, "How soon can you leave?" That was on a Wednesday evening. On Thursday morning, I woke up before Dan was awake. I got Rosie up quietly, told her we were going on a little trip to Auntie Kathleen's, and that she could bring her stuffed rabbit and her coloring books. She asked if Daddy was coming. I said Daddy had to work. She accepted this, the way 5-year-olds accept things, completely, without suspicion, and padded off to get her rabbit. I packed 2 bags for us while Dan slept. I packed my documents, SIN card, passport, Rosie's health card, the folder from the lawyer, and I packed clothes for a week, and I packed Rosie's bear that she'd had since she was born and that she would have been devastated to leave behind. I stood in the hallway for a moment before we left. I looked at the house, the framed photos, the coat hooks, the little drawing Rosie had taped to the wall by the front door, a purple house with a yellow sun above it, and 3 stick figures that she'd labeled Mama, Daddy, and me. I thought about the woman who'd moved into this house 3 years ago, what she'd hoped for. Then I picked up the bags, and I took my daughter's hand and I walked out. We were on the Deerfoot heading south before Dan's alarm went off. My aunt's house is in Lethbridge. It's a modest place, 2 bedrooms, a little yard, the kind of house that's been lived in for 30 years and feels like it. She'd made up the spare room with fresh sheets and put a small stuffed bear on Rosie's pillow, which made Rosie immediately feel at home in a way that made me start crying quietly in the bathroom while she introduced her rabbit to the bear. For the first few days, I barely moved. I slept a lot. Kathleen fed us. Soup, mostly, and toast, the kind of cooking that doesn't ask anything of you, and she watched Rosie in the mornings so I could make calls. Helen, the lawyer. My friend Jody. Eventually, my mom, which was the hardest conversation. Dan called on the second day. I didn't answer. He texted, first normal, then confused, then angry, then something that made my hands go cold. Helen told me to screenshot everything and to stop responding entirely. He came to Kathleen's house on the 4th day. I didn't know he knew where she lived. I'd never told him. What I found out later was that he'd called my mother, framing it as concern, as worry, as a husband desperate to know his wife and daughter were safe, and my mother, who didn't yet know the full picture, had told him. I heard the knock from inside. Rosie was coloring at the kitchen table. I put my hand on her shoulder and said very quietly, "Stay here, Bug." Then I went to stand by the window. Kathleen opened the door. I heard Dan's voice, the version of it he used when he was performing. Warm, reasonable, the voice that had first made me trust him. He said he just wanted to talk. He said he was worried. He said there had been a misunderstanding, and he just wanted to see his daughter. Kathleen said, "She's fine. They're both fine. You should call your lawyer." He tried again. He said, "Please." He even said he was sorry, which was something he'd never said to me. Not once, not in the kitchen, not for any of it. Kathleen said, "Goodbye, Daniel," and closed the door. I stood behind the curtain, shaking, listening to his footsteps go back down the front walk. What happened next happened because of my daughter. We'd been at Kathleen's for a week and a half when I got a call from Helen about a procedural delay, something to do with how the court calendar was backed up, which happens all the time, apparently, and is routine, but which sent me into a kind of spiral that I'm not proud of. I sat at the kitchen table after Rosie was in bed, and I put my head in my hands and I thought, what if he uses the delay to take her? What if he files something first? What if I don't move fast enough and I lose her? I was still sitting there when I heard small footsteps on the linoleum. Rosie was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, holding her rabbit, squinting at the light. She said, "Mama, why are you sad?" I said, "I'm not sad, Bug, I'm just thinking." She crossed the kitchen and climbed into my lap, all of her, 42 pounds of her, like she'd been doing since she could walk, and put both arms around my neck and pressed her face to my shoulder. She said, "I love you the most." Just that. I held her for a long time, and something in me that had been panicking very quietly for months went still. She had done what no one else could. She hadn't solved anything. She hadn't said the right legal strategy or told me it would all work out. She just climbed into my lap and loved me, and somehow that was the thing that reminded me why none of this was optional. Why I had to keep going. She wasn't saving me in the dramatic way. She was saving me in the only way that actually works. The next morning, I called Helen and told her to proceed. The timeline from there was not smooth or cinematic. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and Rosie starting at a new kindergarten in Lethbridge while we stayed at Kathleen's because the temporary order took longer than expected. It was a mediator and a custody schedule, and the moment I sat across a table from Dan for the first time since I'd left, and had to look at his face while a neutral third party translated everything we couldn't say to each other directly. He looked diminished somehow. Smaller. I don't know if that's what I expected. I don't think I'd let myself expect anything. His relationship with the other woman. Her name came out eventually through the lawyers. She was a colleague from his office, someone I'd met once at a work party and thought seemed nice. That relationship was over by the time the mediation happened. I don't know the details. I didn't ask. What I asked about was Rosie. We agreed on a shared parenting arrangement, week on, week off, once things stabilized. It took several months to get there. There were hard periods. Times when Dan pushed back on things. Times when the logistics of shared custody felt like trying to coordinate with someone who lived on a different planet. But we got there, because we both loved her. I have to believe that. There's something strange that happens when a marriage ends. People are either too sorry or not sorry enough, and neither one quite fits what you're actually feeling. My mom cried more than I did at first. My friend Jody offered to fly out from Vancouver to be with me, and I told her to save the money. Coworkers at the daycare where I worked part-time, I'd gone back to work the year before, Dan's objections having quietly dissolved, didn't know what to say, so most of them said nothing, which I actually preferred. The hardest thing wasn't the sadness. The sadness I could manage. The hardest thing was the particular grief of mourning something while also knowing with absolute certainty that leaving it was correct. Those two things don't cancel each other out. I was certain I'd done the right thing, and I still cried in the shower over it. I still sat in Kathleen's yard on summer evenings and missed the version of my life I thought I was going to have. I got a restraining order. That helped. Helen helped me understand what my financial rights were. Alberta's Matrimonial Property Act meant I had a legitimate claim on the equity in the house. Dan eventually agreed to a buyout rather than selling, which took another few months to finalize. I'm not going to pretend the money solved everything, but it helped. It meant I could put a damage deposit on a small place of my own in Lethbridge, close enough to Kathleen that Rosie could see her easily. The apartment had a yellow wall in the kitchen. I kept it. Rosie decided it was her favorite color. There's a particular evening I come back to when I think about when things started to genuinely feel okay. It was a Saturday in early October, about 8 months after I left. Rosie was back with me after a week with her dad. She came in through the door with her backpack and her rabbit, and she smelled like his shampoo. He always used a particular cedar kind, and for a second I had to breathe through a feeling I can't fully name. Then she said, "Mama, I learned a joke," and told me a riddle so deeply unfunny that I laughed out loud anyway, for real. And she looked so pleased with herself that I laughed again. We made pancakes for dinner, which is something Kathleen had started with her and which had become a Saturday ritual. Rosie got batter on the counter and on her sleeve, and possibly in her hair. We ate them with maple syrup, the real kind, because some things in life are worth doing properly, and watched 20 minutes of a nature documentary about birds before she fell asleep against my arm. I carried her to bed. I tucked the rabbit in beside her. I stood in the doorway for a moment looking at her, the way parents do, memorizing something they can't quite name. Then I went to the kitchen and washed the bowls and listened to the apartment around me, the refrigerator hum, the street noise from outside, the specific quality of quiet that belongs to a home where you feel safe. And I thought, I did this. This small and ordinary evening, I made this. I think about the woman who sat on that kitchen floor in Calgary with her ears ringing and her hands flat on the tile. I want to tell her things, obviously. I want to tell her not to wait. I want to tell her to call Kathleen sooner, call Helen sooner, stop making excuses and trust the part of herself that already knew. But I also want to tell her that she was not weak, that she was doing what people do when they're trying to survive inside something, making it manageable, day by day, until the day she could make it stop. She couldn't have known that the thing that would finally steady her was a 5-year-old in pajamas asking why she was sad. I couldn't have known that either, but I know it now. And I carry it with me the way I carry everything she's taught me, quietly, in the part of myself that no one had to break open, because it was there all along. I used to think courage was something you either had or you didn't, like a personality trait, fixed at birth. Some people are brave and some people are not, and I'd spent a long time assuming I was the second kind. What I know now is that it doesn't work that way. Courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, quietly, in the moments when you choose honesty over convenience. When you stop telling yourself the story that makes it easier to stay, and start telling yourself the one that's actually true. I wasn't honest with myself for a long time. I knew things were wrong. I knew the way Dan spoke to me wasn't right, knew the pattern of small degradations that had accumulated over years into something I no longer had a name for, because naming it would have meant acting on it. So I looked away. That wasn't weakness exactly. It was survival, the kind you do when you're inside something and can't yet see the whole shape of it. But at some point, surviving and living are not the same thing, and I had to reckon with that. What got me there wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was Rosie. It was a 5-year-old in pajamas padding across a linoleum floor at 10 o'clock at night because she could sense her mother was hurting. She didn't have language for what was happening around her. She just had instinct and love and the unself-conscious wisdom of a child who hasn't yet learned to talk herself out of her own feelings. She climbed into my lap and said, "I love you the most." And something in me that had been frozen for a very long time cracked open. I think about the kind of woman I want her to grow up to be, and I realized sitting there holding her that I was showing her something every single day, one way or another. Either I was showing her that you endure, that you swallow it, that love means accepting treatment that diminishes you, or I was showing her that you think clearly even when you're frightened, that you make a plan, that you ask for help without shame, that you leave. That leaving is not failure. That it is sometimes the most intelligent and the most principled thing a person can do. Helen told me once that the women who fare best in situations like mine are the ones who stop waiting to feel ready and start moving anyway. That stuck with me, because I was never going to feel ready. There was no version of that February where I woke up calm and certain and unafraid. I was terrified the whole time, when I packed those 2 bags, when I drove down the Deerfoot in the dark, when I sat across that mediation table. The fear didn't go away. I just stopped letting it make my decisions. That's what I want to carry forward, and what I hope Claire's story, my story, leaves with anyone who needs it. Not that things work out neatly, because they don't always. Not that the road is short, because it wasn't, but that the qualities that get you through something like this are ones you already have inside you. The clarity to see what's true, the integrity to act on it even when it costs you something, and the endurance to keep going on the days when you have nothing left except the face of a small person who loves you the most. Rosie didn't save me in the way that makes it into headlines. She saved me in the way that actually matters, by reminding me what I was worth, and what she deserved to grow up watching her mother choose. I made pancakes the other night, real maple syrup, the good kind. She got batter in her hair. I didn't mind at all.